So, who are the two witnesses of Revelation? Revelation chapter 11, it says, I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and I was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the worshippers there, but exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. We know that's talking about the 3.5 years after the rapture. And verse 3, and I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. And so this is talking about that same 42 months after the rapture. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. But these men have power to shut up the sky so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. And they have power to turn waters into blood and strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Now, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower them and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, men from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. But after the 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. And they went up to heaven in a cloud, while their enemies looked on. So at the end there, we see the second rapture, the rapture of the Jews. Now, how do we know these are the Jews, these two witnesses? The two witnesses here are clothed in sackcloth. They prophesy for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. And these are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. So if we can define what the two olive trees and the two lampstands are, then we know who the two witnesses are. So let's start by looking at Zechariah chapter 4. Then the angel who talked with me returned and wakened me as a man is wakened from his sleep. He asked me, what do you see? I answered, I see a solid gold lampstand with a bowl at the top and 7 lights on it, with 7 channels to the lights. And also there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left. Then I asked the angel, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand? Again, I asked him, what are these 2 olive branches beside the 2 gold pipes that pour out golden oil? He replied, do you not know what these are? No, my Lord, I said. So he said, these are the 2 who are anointed to serve the Lord of all the earth. So there's 2 olive trees you notice here. It says in verse 3, and there are also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left. And you notice that also he says, after he mentions the 2 olive trees, he also mentions in verse 12, what are these 2 olive branches beside the 2 gold pipes that pour out golden oil? So we know that there's 2 olive branches on one of these 2 olive trees. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Jeremiah chapter 11. Jeremiah chapter 11, you have as many gods as you have towns, O Judah, and the altars you have set up to burn incense to that shameful god Baal are as many as the streets of Jerusalem. The Lord called you a thriving olive tree with fruit beautiful in form, but with a roar of a mighty storm you will set it on fire and its branches will be broken. The Lord Almighty, who planted you, has decreed disaster for you, because the house of Israel and the house of Judah have done evil and provoked me to anger by burning incense to Baal. So here we see the Lord has called you a thriving olive tree. He says this to Judah. But then he says, because the house of Israel and the house of Judah have done evil, in verse 17. So both those two, Judah is mentioned as being a olive tree, and we know the other olive tree is Israel. Judah and Israel, remember, are 2 separate kingdoms. Remember, after Solomon died, Rehoboam and Jeroboam became, they're the brothers that were sons of Solomon, and Jeroboam became the king of Israel, and Rehoboam became the king of Judah. And Judah and Israel were separate kingdoms from that time on. So we know that they're two separate kingdoms, and they are the two olive trees. They are the two olive trees. And then we know that there's also two olive branches that are on one of those olive trees. And let's take a look at that for a second. If you look at Romans chapter 11, it says, I asked them, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. Did God not reject his people whom he foreknew? Don't you know that the scripture says in the passage about Elijah how he appealed to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Now, verse 16. If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. The branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, he's talking to the Gentiles here, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider this, you do not support the root, but the root supports you. Is the root being Israel. Israel and Judah are the two olive trees, and of course Judah is the olive tree that Christians were grafted into. Verse 19, you will say that branches were broken off so I could be grafted in. Yes, granted. To verse 20, granted. But they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God. Sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in. So what causes people to be grafted in? Belief. What causes them to be broken off? Unbelief. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they'll be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. That's talking about Israelite Jews. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, that's Israel and Judah. And Judah is the one that Christians were grafted into, because Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. How much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? So the Jews can be grafted back in to the olive tree, is what Paul is saying here in Romans 11. Verse 25, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that many of you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies on your account, but as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs, for God's gift and his call are irrevocable. Just as you, who were at one time disobedient to God and have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, the Jews' disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient, the Jews, in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. So here we see that all of Israel is going to be saved, and this will happen after the rapture. When they see Jesus Christ, they will see the one who is their Messiah. And of course, they will see him in Revelation chapter 6. Revelation 6:12, when the rapture happens, and it says that the Lamb actually appears, that everyone hides in the rocks of the mountains. It says, hide us from the face of the Lamb. Because they're afraid that the day of his wrath has come, and of course it hasn't. There's 3.5 years after that, in which right after that comes Revelation chapter 7, where the Jews are marked. The two witnesses are marked. Revelation chapter 7, right after the rapture happens, right after the Christians have been caught up into heaven. Revelation 7, verse 1. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Now the rapture has just happened. So here we see verse 4, then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. Verse 5, from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. And remember, 12,000 is the number of completion, so it's not necessarily saying there's exactly 12,000. It's just saying that these are the completed Jews. From the tribe of Judah, there was 12,000. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. From Gad, 12,000. From Asher, 12,000. From Naphtali, 12,000. From the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. From Simeon, 12,000. From Levi, 12,000. From Issachar, 12,000. From Zebulun, 12,000. Joseph, 12,000. And Benjamin, 12,000. These are tribes of Israel. This is very obviously Jews who are being marked, and this is in fulfillment of Romans chapter 11, where it says that the Jews have experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles come in. When is that? Does that end? At the rapture. At the rapture of the full number of Gentiles, when they come in, they go up in the rapture. And who takes over the gospel in the 3.5 years left over? Right here, the Jews. We see the Jews take over the gospel. They are marked by God. And we later on see that because they're marked, they do not receive the curses. And the hardships that come on the rest of the world do not come on the Jews. It's just like in the Old Testament, where the Jews were not hurt in Egypt, when the other people were under the curses and the plagues. The Israelites were not. So right after this, in Revelation chapter 7, it says, after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Every nation, tribe. This isn't just Jews here. This is every tribe, people, and nation, and language standing before the throne in front of the Lamb, and they were wearing the white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures. Why? Because every believer has an angel. Your angel always sees the face of the Father. Yes, that was talking about children, but when you grow up, you need angels more, not less. They fell down on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying amen and praise and glory. And then it says, verse 13, then one of the elders asked me, these in white robes, who are they and where did they come from? And I answered, sir, you know. And he said, these are they who have come out of the great tribulation. That's what we're living in right now. It's not part of the last 3.5 years. It's not part of the 70 weeks of years. There's no 7-year tribulation. The tribulation is a period of time before the rapture. And it says, and he said, these are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tent over him. Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat on them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. This is us. This is Christians. The Christians were just raptured. Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, the Christians were raptured. And we see that right when that happened, the Jews were marked, and right before this, and those are the two witnesses. We saw before, those are the two witnesses. Romans chapter 11 made it very clear that that the Jews will come into the kingdom after the full number of Gentiles have come in. And finally, the last thing we're going to look at is Daniel chapter 9, just to confirm all this. Daniel chapter 9, talking about the 70 weeks of years, verse 24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make a reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal a vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy. Okay, it says 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. He's talking to Daniel. And he says, thy people, which is Israel and Judah, and upon thy holy city, that's Jerusalem. Jerusalem's the capital. And so Israel and Judah and Jerusalem are who the 70 weeks of years are for. And then if you look at verse 27, and he shall confirm, this is talking about Messiah, because it says in verse 26, the subject is Messiah. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. In other words, after 69 of the weeks, actually 3.5 years after, but it says after, which is true, after the 69 weeks, which is, 31 AD, 3.5 years after 27 AD, which is exactly 483 years after 457 BC when Artaxerxes made the declaration to rebuild Jerusalem. And so it says, 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Verse 27, and he, Messiah, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And of course, in the midst of the week, 3.5 years into his ministry, Jesus died on the cross, caused all sacrifice and oblation to cease in heaven. They were no longer needed. Jesus' blood was the final atonement. And the overspreading of abomination, he shall make it desolate. So the sacrifice was made desolate, even until the consummation, the destruction of Israel in 70 AD. And that determined shall be poured out on the desolate, those who are making the desolate sacrifices, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So we see that the 70 weeks of years are all for Israel. So the rapture, when it happens, the last 3.5 years of the 70 weeks of years can happen for Israel after the rapture happens. And that's why the two witnesses are the Jews, because they carry their gospel through the last 3.5 years. And after the rapture, they are marked. And so those are who the two witnesses are. Thanks for watching.